Book One all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She is a podcast host too, like me, coach, trainer, and a speaker. No other than Miss Victoria Mattingly. Welcome to Book 101, Miss Victoria, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Absolutely. So, my name is Dr. Victoria Mattingly. A lot of people call me Dr. V. I am CEO of Mattingly Solutions, or a workplace inclusion and allyship consulting firm, so helping to bring more inclusion and allyship into organizations. I have my PhD in organizational psychology, so using data and science to improve the human experience at work, and I'm a soon to be two-time published author. My first book is Inclusalytics, all about how diversity, equity, and inclusion leaders use data to drive their work. And my forthcoming book is called Act Like an Ally, Work with an Ally, all about allyship.
Awesome. Dr. V, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And today, let's talk about leading with heart, head, and hands. Can you tell about this topic all about?
Yeah, so, you know, when I started my company and just my career in organizational psychology, I very much was focused on, data and systems and like how can we update or rebuild systems that they lead to fair, more equitable outcomes. And I forgot an important piece of that. And what I'm getting to is hearts and minds, like having to convince people and have them change their hearts and minds to then lead to, hands in this case would be action and behaviors. That's really important as well. It's not just the systems, it's not just the processes or the measurement, but it's changing hearts and minds so then we can, be all in, all hands in, to actually be working towards a change together.
Interesting topic, Dr. V. And how do you define leading with heart, head, and hands in practice?
Yeah, so leading with your heart means really taking a human centered approach to leadership, leading with empathy, leading with compassion, leading with emotion. Having emotional intelligence is very important. And then leading with your head, it's being rational, having, well logical, well thought out processes, being just really cognitive, right, and leading with practicality, with pragmatism. And then leading with hands, it means getting in there and getting dirty with the work, right? Actually doing the work. When I talk about allyship, I always say an ally is not who you are, it's what you do. And so by leading with hands, we're on the foreground, on the ground floor, like getting work done, put all hands in and taking action.
Dr. V, if you relate your book to our topic today, how would you relate it?
So, Inclusalytics is very much all about the data behind diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, thinking about leading with head, heart, and hands. So, head would be, what knowledge, what awareness do you have about diversity, equity, inclusion? And with heart, how do you feel in the workplace? Do you feel like you're being valued, respected, seen, and heard, and measuring inclusion just like that? And then finally, with hands, how can we measure the types of behaviors that result in an inclusive workplace? And an important way to think about measurement when it comes to behaviors and action, you should never ask the individual themselves, how often do you act inclusively? How often do you step up as an ally? you should always ask the people around them. So their subordinates, their teammates, and their leaders, because that's where you're going to get a far better, far more accurate measure of behaviors by people observing that person rather than asking the person themselves. Because we all want to believe we're always, doing all the best behaviors, but what matters is that those around us see them and experience them.
Very well said, Dr. V. Very well said. Why is this integrated approach more critical for effective leadership today than relying on just one or two elements?
Well, you really need to have all the components. So there's some research that shows that technical knowledge, right, leading with the head, the technical knowledge is really important for early career. But then the more one moves up on the leadership chain, the more that you need that emotional intelligence. And then I also think about servant leadership and why it's so important that leaders should come in as servers, like the ones actually doing the work alongside their people, removing barriers, providing resources, but actually taking action and being that type of servant leader.
Again, if you compare act like an ally to the topic that we're talking about, what is all? How
Yeah,
can you
so
connect it?
Yeah, so being an ally requires, having the right knowledge of oneself. So being aware of your own privileges that you have, resources that you have, biases that you might hold. So it's really getting the head right. And then with the heart, there is a lot of, same with inclusion, there's a lot of empathy, there's a lot of communication. There's a lot of, just compassion that really enables someone to be a good ally. And then finally, as I said before, we're talking about leading with hands and using that as a metaphor for action and behaviors. Being an ally really is what you do, not who you are. And on Amazon, I was only able to upload the one side of this book, but this is actually two books in one. So there's Act Like an Ally, but then on the other side, there's Work with an Ally. And so there's a whole second book when you flip it over that's for the partner of allyship. So I always say you should never ally alone. You should always be an ally in partnership with the individual or group that you're trying to serve. But there's very few resources out there that to provide for that other side of allyship, those partners. And so I wrote two books, one for the ally, one for the partner, because it really is a two-sided scenario.
Dr. B, how can leaders authentically connect with their team values and purpose without sacrificing strategic direction or results?
Yeah, you could definitely, connect with your team at that deeper level without sacrificing, the strategic side of leadership. When it comes to being an ally or being an inclusive leader, a really important characteristic is to be vulnerable and to be authentic, and share times where maybe you didn't get it right as an ally, or maybe you didn't lead as inclusively as you were able to, and what you learned from that situation and how you changed your behavior as a result. So really, letting people see that more vulnerable personal side of you, because what that then does is gives permission for others in the workplace to then be more vulnerable. And with vulnerability comes innovation. It comes, more connection, which lead to better partnerships and better relationships in the workplace. So being vulnerable, being authentic, and creating that space of psychological safety where people can feel comfortable bringing new ideas and different opinions and perspectives to the workplace.
Very well said, Dr. V. Beautifully articulated. Very well said. When does a leading with heart become a liability?
I think if when we start losing the action and the brain power on it, right? We can't just lead with our heart and just lead with empathy and compassion without also keeping in mind, what's the what is the best interest of the team, of the business, of our customers. There's still, it's a balancing act. We can't just let someone, if someone's having a hard time, just take an infinite amount of time off. Like that person still needs to be within the policies of the organization. And then also leading with heart, but then never doing anything about it, right? So if you discover that someone's having a hard time, there's a broken system or process that's hurting people, but then you don't actually do something about it, that could be a liability as well. And I think about employee surveys. Whenever organizations send out employee surveys, a big mistake is then not taking the results of that survey and then acting upon it, because if you don't act upon it, you're going to ruin trust. People aren't going to want to respond the next year, because what's the point of responding to the survey if nothing's going to happen? So we have to, when we listen with an open heart, we also have to think about the rational side, and also, and then finally, the actions that are going to be taken based on what we learn through those conversations.
Dr. V, as a speaker, trainer, coach, and podcast host, what are your short term and long term goals?
Oh, my short term goals are to sell as many of my books as possible when it comes out in August. So please check out mattingleysolutions.com/allyship for information on the book. You can pre order it. Long term goal is to really do my part, do a substantial part in making the workplace better for humans, right? And so, how can we intentionally build and lead workplaces where everyone feels valued, respected, seen, and heard? How can we make it so work is less stressful? How can we make it so work is more meaningful? Really, maximizing my work as an IO psychologist to help make the workplace a better place for everyone. I think that's my long term goal.
A better place indeed. Good luck to your goals and looking forward for more success, Dr. V. And what would be your piece of advice for those people out there who want to be a speaker like you, trainer, coach, podcast host, and of course, an author?
So I have different advice for all those outlets. When it comes to being a podcast host, I would recommend just getting started and getting some
Yes.
live streaming software. And you don't have to do it alone. I love interviewing people. My podcast, I interview people every week, and I love it because I learn something new every time. And they're the ones giving all the content. I'm just asking, questions. So don't feel like you have to have all the things. Just need to get going, and then you can always iterate and improve as you go. So that's my advice for podcast hosts. For speakers, I would recommend looking into speaking bureaus. That's usually like the middleman between organizations and conferences and institutions and speakers. I myself have been getting speaking opportunities through my personal network, but that's not as sustainable as a speaking bureau could be. So that's my advice for that. For being an author, really do your research with if you want to be a traditional published author, or if you want to go to the self-publishing route, or there's also a lot of hybrid options, but learning about what those options mean and picking the one that's best for you. For Inclusalytics and for my forthcoming book, uh, I self-published because it was really important, especially with Inclusalytics, to get it out as quickly as possible. In the States, DEI had its moment. It's now over. And so if I would have waited to get the book out, I would have been too late if I would have gone the traditional publishing route. As a trainer, I do recommend, looking into the science of workplace learning to really understand how to build and deliver meaningful training, workshops, seminars, programs, because whenever you learn like the importance of learning objectives and doing a training needs evaluation, and also doing a program evaluation at the end, you're able to have such a more meaningful and impactful training experience for the end user, as opposed to just kind of jumping in and just, slapping something together and training people on it without, having the science behind it. And then there was one more category.
Trainer,
I said coach.
coach.
So I do recommend coaching, certifications, or if not, not that, at least like into certain programs, because then you can develop frameworks and, having like more of a standardization approach to coaching. It concerns me when people just jump in and call themselves a coach, but they don't have any sort of training or, foundation behind it. So get that training, find a certain framework, and really, don't reinvent the wheel, and then you'll find your own specialty, your own niche as you go.
Your own niche, people very important. And be consistent in everything you do. And Dr. V, can you recommend a book that influenced your journey?
Yes. So the book I recommend is The Person You Mean to Be by Dolly Chugg. And it's a book all about allyship before allyship was even a big thing. My dissertation work was on allyship, and I was able to talk to Dolly when I was still formulating my dissertation proposal. And her book, she was wrapping it up at that point. But there's a lot of concepts in that book that I've repurposed in my books and trainings and different thought leadership. The one idea that really stuck with me is, instead of calling ourselves good people, because when we call ourselves good people, we get into this binary. So if I'm a good person, then I can't do a bad thing. But good people do bad things all the time, and they're still inherently a good person. But what happens is you call me out and say I did some bad thing, and then I go, no, I didn't mean it like that. I'm a good
Good.
person. I'm a good person. I would never, that was not my intention. You get all defensive, and then you don't even end up changing your behavior as a result. So Dolly talks about being a good ish person. So I'm a good ish person, meaning I'm trying to be a good person. I have good intentions, but sometimes I do make mistakes. And that way, when mistakes happen, you're able to focus on what did I do wrong, rather than, oh, I that can't be right because I'm a good person, right? So it unravels the person from the behavior, so we can focus on the behavior change rather than, oh my gosh, I'm having a existential crisis because I'm supposed to be a good person and I did this bad
Dr. V, we salute you for being good and
thing.
of being you. We salute you. How can organizations design system and cultures that reward leaders for integrating heart, head, and hands rather than just one dimension?
Yeah, so I think about how I define inclusion as the behaviors that result in others feeling valued, respected, seen, and heard. And so being able to measure, how people feel in the organization and how they're being treated in the organization by their leaders, that's really important. And then making sure that people have the right information. So whenever, there's things like trainings or certain competencies that leaders are expected to uphold, knowing what those are, so you know what's expected of you, you know how you're expected to behave and how you're expected to treat your subordinates, and then rewarding leaders based on those behaviors. So really tying performance reviews, performance management to inclusive workplace behaviors.
Dr. B, what's the biggest misconceptions leaders have about trying to lead with all three?
I think a big misconception is that you're already doing it, because, going back to before,
Yes.
like, I'm a good person, I'm a good leader, I already know the stuff, and I lead with emotional intelligence, and I'm doing the work. But have they asked their subordinates that? Have they asked their team that, their peers that, their own leaders that? And so that's why 360 assessments are so valuable in organizations, because you can get more of that full perspective of what's going on. So I might think I'm this great leader, but oh, it turns out I'm missing the mark on this whole area where people don't see me acting, they don't see me being knowledgeable, and they don't see me, leading with empathy and compassion. So just thinking that they are doing it all right, because there's always room for growth and development.
Indeed, totally agree with you, Dr. V. And before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because Abstract Essay is already in fifth season, Abstract Poetry in second season, and of course, my book 101 review in fifth season, Comedy 101 second season, and my Food 101 in its fifth season as well. Geography 101 in its fourth season, and my baby podcast Law 101 and Mental Health 101. Love Letters in third season, Music 101 in fourth season, as well as my Music 101 and Science 101 and Sex 101 in each first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. Dr. V looking forward, why will mastering this integrated approach be even more essential for the next generation of leaders?
So AI is about to replace a lot of jobs and skills that are in the workplace. But what AI can't replace or replicate is taking a heart-centered, human-centered approach to leadership, to communication, to how we operate. And so by operating with your head, your heart, and your actions, as full humans, that's something that we can't replace with AI. And so it's going to be really critical as we continue down this AI journey to really define, what's uniquely human to leading and being an employee, and making and starting to build jobs around that.
Dr. Victoria Mattingly, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Can you please invite our listeners to support your advocacy, your business, as well as your books?
Yeah, please come check me out at mattingly.solutions.com, and on LinkedIn, Victoria Mattingly, PhD. Thank you so much for having me, Daniel.
You are most welcome. Yes, people, let's support Dr. Victoria Mattingly, because if you support her, more and more and more empowering books to come, more and more empowering coaching to come, and more empowering leaders to come. Dr. Victoria, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks again.
More to come, people. See you soon.